Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands. I'm your host, Joe Jackson. Alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Kraig Bowers. Purdue takes on Oregon, the second leg of their West Coast trip. We will have everything you need to know going into the game right here. It is a 3 o'clock Eastern time tip on NBC and Peacock, I believe. So that's Saturday, January 18th. Purdue just coming off yesterday, a 11-point win at Washington, picking up the first road win on this West Coast trip. I think getting that win alleviates a little pressure of this being like a must-win type game or anything like that. Obviously, Purdue still wants to win. They're on a 6-game winning streak, but this is their toughest game by far out of that kind of 6-game winning streak that they are on. So, should be a pretty good one. Two solid teams do things a little bit differently, but I think it should be a good one. And Kraig, I'll throw it to you. Just kind of your overall thoughts heading into this game.
Well, hey, Joe, it's good to be back. All I've done is sleep and work and then get back on, and we're talking Purdue basketball again right away.
Yep.
This Oregon team, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's different. The last 5 games in a row, it seems like we've talked about going up against teams with a dominant score or a dominant duo scoring. This Oregon team's not that way, right? They have 6 different guys that average between 8.8 points a game to 13.7 points a game. A team that's got some balance and is pretty complete all the way around. They come into this matchup 15-2 overall on the 13th best schedule in the country, 25th in KenPom, a little bit better offensively, 23rd on KenPom offensive efficiency, 41st on KenPom defense. If we look at them from a net standpoint, they've got a really nice net. They do have a quad 2 loss because UCLA's dropped some, but 8-1 in quad 1. There's not a whole lot of other teams in the country necessarily that have a better quad 1 resume than what they do right now, unless you start really breaking it down to quad 1A. They got wins over Texas A&M. We do not. They have a win over San Diego State, a win over Bama just like us, and a win over Maryland just like us. So I just think a pretty complete all-around team that maybe doesn't jump off the page. We were talking about this before we came on air, but if you're just kind of scrolling through their stat lines and their key factors on like KenPom and whatnot, nothing jumps off the page of like, wow, they are one of the best 20 teams in the country at doing this. But there's nothing they're bad at either. Just really, really fundamental, sound, complete team to me.
Yeah, and they're just such a weird team because, I put out a tweet, I believe half of their wins at this point, or just basically almost 50% of their wins, at one point they had less than like a 33% chance to win in the second half. They are a team that just randomly has these big lulls. The first 2 months, they couldn't put together a good first half to save their life, but then they still won games and they still were able to grind things out. They beat Penn State by 1 on the road. They beat Ohio State by 2 on the road. They beat Maryland by 4 at home. Like, those are their last 3 games. They lost to UCLA by 2. Like, they just play close games, and it's kind of been regardless of the competition level. They beat Portland in OT by 10. Portland is 312th in KenPom. Oregon was down 5 with like 30 seconds left. They should have lost that game. It's a team that is got so many good wins, and that's why you see them on like the 2 seed line come like in bracketology. But you like watch the team, and I'm just like, man, the eye test doesn't quite match up for me. But at the same time, they're still good because they still get wins, and I think they can pose some interesting problems to Purdue.
Yeah, for sure. This team in some way reminds me of like the Dakota Mathias, Vince Edwards, Isaac Haas, PJ Thompson group there that was together where, everybody scored 9 to 12 points. And you didn't necessarily know who it was going to be on any given night. But similar to that team, maybe not just an absolute superstar, although I think Biddle and Shilstad are really good. Usually this is where I like grab some individual stats or team stats off of KenPom and really highlight one thing or another. But like I said, they're just kind of like complete through there. I don't know that there's a whole lot that jumps out other than the fact that they're 234th in the country in terms of 3-point distribution in terms of a percentage of their overall points. So a team that is going to score more from 2 than 3 necessarily. And the other thing, I guess, that jumped out to me, and maybe you can speak to this because you've watched them more than me, in terms of putting other teams on the free throw line. They seem to be very similar to us in that regard, in that free throw, a point scored from free throws for their opponents. They rank 325th in the country. Am I reading that right?
Yeah. They don't allow many teams to get to the line. They're going to play with like Nate Biddle, who we'll talk about more in depth because he'll be a big piece in this game for Oregon. He'll generally play that kind of deeper drop coverage where he helps protect the rim. He's done a very good job. They're fine. They're not like crazy extreme like Illinois in terms of forcing mid-range shots, but they are going to try to force more jumpers than allow teams to drive to the rim. What that means is then teams aren't going to draw as many fouls, and then they don't get to the line as much. So, yeah, that's like the one area that they do win pretty well is they win the free throw margin or free throw attempt margin by a good chunk. Generally, they're a good free throw shooting team. But like you said, like they don't they aren't like they're solid at not turning the ball over. They're solid at forcing turnovers. They're not elite in either category. They're fine on the glass. They do a pretty good job at the free throw line. They can knock down threes. They can knock down some twos, but nothing's like crazy elite. Whereas like, even with Washington, right? It was, I was coming in being like, hey, Washington like doesn't allow 3-point attempts. Like that's the one thing that they're going to do. Like Oregon doesn't even have anything in that type of nature as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. And just, going through the stat sheet, just really solid all the way around, like we've said a couple of different times. Now let's just jump into some of the players, or I guess from just a design standpoint, you've talked defensively that, they're going to play and drop quite a bit. I guess from an offensive standpoint, what do you expect to see from an Oregon team in terms of what they like to do?
Yeah, offensively, they're a very free-flowing type offense. They run their sets and things of that like that. But they're going to push the ball. They want to play pretty fast. They are fine taking the first solid shot. Like they're fine just getting them up. They're a team that has pretty balanced scoring in terms of just like Shellstad is a dude. I mean, he's I think 14 for his last 20 from three. He has started out slow on the year, but he is really heated up, and he's what is he 12 for his last 16 from three in the last 3 games. He's on a heater, simply put. And he was a guy that had preseason player of the year type buzz in the Big Ten. They have a big to kind of balance that with Biddle, and then they have some wings that can kind of just do a little bit of everything. Tracy can shoot everywhere. TJ Bamba hasn't shot the ball well, but he's a big physical guard. Brandon Angel is once again one of the more efficient players in D1 basketball. So like they just kind of have a good balance all around that. They can run pick and roll, get a shot up quick. They can throw it to Biddle a bunch and work from the post. And I would honestly, if I'm Oregon, I would like to see that a lot more. Pretty good off ball movement where they can get cuts. And then they are a team also that will ISO some, where they just kind of will let their guys cook if they have a matchup and just kind of let them go.
Yeah, the couple of games that I watched, it seemed like they started off really trying to focus on going through Biddle, and then it was like they would just hit these pockets where they forgot he was on the floor.
Yeah.
But they've got other guys that can score the ball too. But to your point with Shellstad, Shellstad, since that Illinois game, he's gone for 23 points, 24 points, and 17 points on 80%, 73%, and 70% from the field. So he's heating up. Let's just put it that way. The struggling that he had earlier in the season appears as of right now to be out of his system. So unfortunately for Purdue, we couldn't catch him when he was on a down cycle, I guess. But let's jump into some of these starters. So like we've talked about already a couple times, Jackson Shellstad, a 6-foot guard, averaging 12.5 points a game, 3.1 rebounds and 3 assists per game, shooting 37% from three on 4.5 attempts a game. You got Jadrian Tracy, a 6'5" shooting guard, averaging 8.8 points a game, 3.2 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and shooting 40% from three. And then TJ Bamba, kind of in that 3 spot, another 6'5" wing, averaging right around 10 points a game. And I feel like when I was looking at these guards and wings, it was like, 3 rebounds and 2 assists, 3 rebounds and 2 assists. Like everybody rebounds a little bit. Everybody facilitates a little bit. But again, for him, 3.4 rebounds and 2.6 assists. Not a 3-point shooter. Shoots 28%. The few that I saw him attempt looked terrible in the games that I watched. But I guess let's just get your thoughts on the guard and wing room there from Oregon.
Yeah, it is a strength because there is depth, and we'll talk about a guy off the bench too who has been very good. Shellstad's maybe not quite at the superstar level like some expected, but he has 17, 24, and 23 over the last 3 games, 14 assists to 2 turnovers in that span. He is more of a scorer. He wants to be more of just a pure bucket getter in term instead of maybe a true point guard in terms of facilitating, but he's also given that opportunity, that freedom to go hunt his own. Elite in the mid range, like he's been very, very good from the mid range area. He's obviously like I've said it, I feel like 4 times now at this point. He's gotten super hot from 3 quickly. He'll also just be a guy that like he'll take some deep ones, he'll take some tough ones. He's up to 50% on mid range shots. He's up to basically 38% on threes, or 37%, sorry, on threes. So he's a guy that he hasn't been great at getting downhill into the rim, especially in the half court, but super fast with the ball, like really fast with the ball, and can kind of get downhill in a flash if he needs to. Wants to be more perimeter oriented though. JJ Tracy has been one of my favorite kind of role players to watch. Shoots the well from 3, has kind of this lankiness to him that allows him to kind of get downhill. He's been pretty, really good inside the paint. He's shooting like 70% inside the paint. He's going to be a 3 or more or less at the rim. Also a good defender. Like he has, just with his length, I think he can get into guys a little bit and move them that way. He's a little bit more lankier, whereas TJ Bamba is a little bit bulkier. They're both 6'5", but TJ Bamba is a dude who he's struggled this year. Like I know that he's 28% from 3 this year. I do not want him getting an open look, like at all. He is a 37% career 3-point shooter. This is the only year he shot below 36% from 3 on his in his career. This is his 5th year. Like he's a guy that it hasn't translated quite to Oregon from Villanova, but he is a dude that, given the right matchup, can put up points in a hurry. It just hasn't been there, simply put. And it'll be an interesting matchup because whoever's on him, whether it be, I would assume, Braden or Lawyer, like he's going to have the size advantage. They will post him up a little bit if they can, but not too often. Also another good defender, physical. Like he's just somebody that the numbers I don't think represent how good he is. He is much better, in my opinion, than what the numbers have shown this year. And great Osborne just hit 5 threes against Purdue. Like I don't want to see TJ Bamba get going quick because I think that makes it a difficult task for Purdue to defend.
Well, let's hope for Purdue's sake he keeps shooting the way he has, because I would have never guessed from the small sample size that I saw in terms of his attempts that he was once a 36% or above 3-point shooter. But I think, we'll get into kind of the matchup specifically later on in terms of how Purdue will defend those 3. But talk about the other 2 starters. Brandon Angel at power forward, again, averaging about 9 points a game, about 3.5 rebounds a game, averages 1 assist a game. Not a real high volume shooter, but somebody that to me just looks super sound and good decision maker and fluid out there on the court. And then Nate Biddle, who I was really impressed with. Maybe I just didn't pay enough attention to the West Coast teams coming into the year, although I felt like I'd heard a lot about Jackson. The first time I watched him play, I he kind of shocked me a little bit because I just hadn't heard a ton about him, and I thought he looked really good. 7-footer, averaging 13.7 points. He is the leading scorer on this team, also the leading rebounder at 7.8 rebounds a game. But a guy to me who's I thought just looked really sound. I thought footwork looked good. He has a nice touch. He stepped out and hit a 3 in the game that I was watching earlier today as well, although that's not necessarily a strength for him on the year. But I was impressed with him.
Biddle's like, I haven't done specific rankings, but he's a top 5 big in the conference. I'm pretty confident in. He is a dude that he's been super efficient in post ups. He can get to kind of the right hook. He's starting to shoot the ball much better too. He's up to 30% from the year, but he's 43.5% from 3 in conference play. So he's also another guy starting to just shoot the ball better. Very good rim protector, 7 foot. Like he's just solid. Like he is just a solid built player. But still pretty good mobility. Definitely the best rebounder on the team. And like I agree. Like I think they should go to him more. And I would guess first starts on him but I do think Biddle, like this is a matchup where first maybe isn't the best, whereas first I think or Biddle could, in theory, kind of overpower him at times. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm also not confident first is going to start on Biddle. I'm probably more confident. I was more confident in TKR starting on Asabor than I am with first on Biddle, just given how he plays. But that would be my guess. But Brandon Angel is a dude that not high volume, but he's he's a top 20 efficient player in the entire country. He is top 20 in true shooting percentage. Doesn't quite have the attempts. I think he's like just under the threshold to officially make it, but he's a guy that's just crazy hyper efficient. I think Dana Altman has been on record saying he's one of the smartest players he's ever coached, and that's just kind of who he is. Smart player. Not going to put the ball on the ground too much. He's more of a spot up guy or somebody that's going to kind of be at the rim. Has a little bit of a mid-range game as well, though. He's shooting 83% at the rim, and then he's shooting really well on catch and shoot threes. So somebody that you just have to be aware of, and that's where his shooting ability maybe makes me think first starts on him, and TKR just lives with Biddle because you know you're going to double the post anyways. But they complement each other pretty well, and Biddle can't say enough about him. Like he's arguably their best player.
Yeah, and to your point of efficiency, Angels averaging almost 9 points a game on only 5.4 field goal attempts a game. That jumped out for sure. But and on the point of Biddle being a rim protector, almost averaging 2 blocks a game at this point in the season. Also, this is a group that has a relatively short rotation. There's really only 8 guys that are going to play significant minutes. So let's talk about the 3 guys on the bench in terms of Keyshawn Barthelemy. A 6'2" guard who's actually Oregon's third leading scorer, even though that he comes off the bench. Also, their best 3-point shooter as of right now, statistically shooting 45% on the year with 4.1 attempts per game. You got Kwame Evans at 6'9", averaging 6.9 points a game and 4.3 rebounds, and then Supreme Cook also at 6'9", that will come in and spell Biddle some, averaging right around 6.3 points and shocker 3 rebounds a game.
Yeah, I will start with Keyshawn Barthelemy. I think he is 6th man of the year in the Big Ten. He has been so important for Oregon off the bench. If we go back, right, I said Oregon's been in a lot of games where they were down kind of late in the second half. Multiple times, Keyshawn Barthelemy basically single-handedly won them a game. It seems like every single game he hits at least 1 or 2 big-time shots. Is shooting really, really well from 3. He's been a good 3-point shooter throughout his career, but this has been his best season from that. Also a good passer and just able to kind of help run the offense. They will run Barthelemy and Shellstad together a lot. That's been a lot of their closing lineup where they'll go those two, Bamba, one of Tracy, Angel, Evans, and then Biddle is kind of where their closing lineup has often been. And he can just do a little bit of whatever they need. Good defender, can be pesky. Facilitator, like I said, takes care of the ball, knocks down good shots from the perimeter. Maybe hasn't been great on the interior. He's not shooting well inside the paints, but another guy that can get to the mid-range, which is a general theme for Oregon that they kind of love living in that mid-range area. So he's been awesome. 6th man of the year, I would guess, is if the season ended today. KJ Evans hasn't quite had the sophomore leap I think I and many were hoping. He is just kind of this linky forward that has really good defensive upside, and that's where I think his biggest calling card is. The shot hasn't quite come around. Excuse me. And he hasn't been super efficient, just even on the interior, but he's listed at 6'9". Like, he does not look 6'9" to me. He looks like 6'11", just with how he's built to me. I've never seen him in person, obviously, but so only on TV, but he's a guy that just feels like so much taller than 6'9" and really big wingspan. A guy that probably hasn't quite performed up to expectations. Supreme Cook has been getting more minutes as of late. He or more production, I should say, and he's just a bigger body, 6'9", 230, rebounder, post hooks, layups. That's kind of his game. And I don't think he's the best rim protector, just given his size, 6'9", but physical body is going to play hard for whatever minutes he's in. And that's kind of their rotation. Like, the only other guy even probably worth mentioning is Raheem Moss. He's like a 6'3" guard. He hasn't played much lately. Really hasn't played well for Oregon this year, but at his best, he's a physical rebounder that can facilitate and kind of get downhill. So that's kind of where they're at. They mainly do run the three-man bench though.
Yeah, and a team, even in terms of shot selection, that's pretty balanced when you look at the guard wing room. Like, you don't happen to be on this team that's like, well, like, he's only going to jack threes. You don't have to worry about him driving. So we just have to worry about him on the 3-point line. Everybody can do a little bit of it from outside and from inside. I thought Bartholomew jumped out just in terms of a guy that has a lot of swagger and a lot of confidence. So that makes sense. You've watched a few more of the games than me, and talking about him late down the stretch in those close games, that's who he reads like to be, a guy that's, not going to get shook by what happened on the play previously, I guess I would say. We want to go ahead.
100%. No, you're good.
All right. So let's talk about maybe matchups and just how Purdue tries to attack this team. So let's maybe think defensively first. We've already talked a little bit, or you have, about how you think First and TKR are going to match up with Biddle and Angel to start the game. But I guess just I assume CJ's on Jackson then. Yeah,
That would be my guess.
That's where you're going. I guess so. So what are your in a team that is this balanced? Even though I guess you're going into the game thinking the two guys you got to stop are Shellstad and Biddle, right? First, but there's still a lot of balance on this team around them. How does Purdue have to approach this game defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to, like, it's hard to do because, right, there's just so many options that Oregon can have. I think you want to take away the perimeter. Like, I think you can live with Oregon having a good mid-range game. I don't think you can live with Oregon having a good three-point shooting game. And that's, Purdue's defense by design has been to allow teams to take threes. So it'll be interesting to see that balance, just given that they have shooters everywhere. And some of the percentages maybe don't quite show it, but especially in that starting lineup, like, all 5 players are very capable of knocking down a three. So I think just one, like, the first and foremost, though, and I should have just started with this, they got to stop the ball. Oregon's going to push. Shellstad will get the ball to the 3-point line within 2 seconds. Like, you have to stop that initial push. That'll be a lot on CJ, my guess. And they might even run where, like, Purdue might run just with, given that Purdue is probably going to switch all guard actions anyways, I would assume. They might just have CJ pick up whoever's bringing up the ball, whether it's Bartholomew, Shellstad, TJ. Like, it could be a scenario where it doesn't matter who brings it up. CJ is just going to pick him up, try to check him, and not let them kind of get into that initial transition offense. And then once they get into secondary, it's just kind of knowing your personnel. Like, they're going to be doubling the post or shading baseline like they always do, Purdue does. So then your rotations have to be good. Washington was a team you could afford to be a little, step late. I know Washington still shot pretty well from 3, but, like, you could afford to be a little bit late and cheat in a little bit more, just knowing that Washington's not a great 3-point shooting team. Oregon has dudes that can catch and shoot, or they'll get into the pull-up. So like, Purdue's going to do what Purdue's going to do. I think just big thing is rotations have to be on point. Like, can't let Oregon get quick, easy looks.
Right. And basically what you're describing is CJ playing like the jammer spot, right? Where just whoever's coming up with the ball, he's going to take him, try to slow everything down. And then, like you said, from there, you're going to be switching anyway. I'm with you. I think this is just I think it's going to be really interesting. And we kind of alluded to this previously, but just to see how Purdue handles them. Purdue has looked much, much better defensively. They're all the way up into the 30s now on KenPom. We were wrong, or I was wrong. They weren't as low as the 90s. They were at 71 was the lowest that they were. Cover Stats mentioned that to me today. But still, that's a massive jump in a really short amount of time. But we've seen these matchups where Purdue can really focus on stopping a primary score or 2 primary scores. And this is a completely different situation. So I'm 100% with you. I think rotations is going to be really, really important because there's not really anybody you can lay off on this team. And I do think, even though they didn't scare me as like a overly like shifty athletic guard room, but they still get into the paint fairly well. I do think it's going to be really important that Purdue just stays in front of ball, like stay in front of your man. Don't let him get into the paint sort of situation. So if we maybe transition a little bit offensively, then where do you see Purdue being able to attack this Oregon team?
Yeah, I think it's going to start in the mid-range most likely. I think Oregon is a team, especially with Biddle and deep drop coverage. That's their base. Biddle at times will hedge, and so you could see Oregon just come out in that. They're a team. They're similar, closer to Washington in terms of like Oregon has multiple looks that they'll go to defensively, but I think it does start with Braden just being able to get into the mid range. Now, Oregon's been a very good pick and roll defense. They do a good job of just kind of staying attached and being able to just force some tougher looks. But at the same time, Braden's pretty good at basketball. From there, they haven't played a ton of teams that post up, but from what I've seen, for the most part, they don't double the post. Obviously, things can change. They obviously could against TKR, but if that's the case, kind of like Washington, just kind of throw that to TKR and let them work if they're going to do that. So, I know that's where it's a cop out or whatever, but that is where I think it starts, is those two, just kind of like always for Purdue. I do think first needs to probably be aggressive once again on the glass, and especially if Oregon is going to hedge, you can get some looks where TKR throws those little lobs to first in the post, or maybe not lobs, but passes to first cutting from the dunker spot, things like that. That's kind of where I think offense should start for Purdue. Obviously, you need dudes to knock down threes also. I feel like that's just a given.
Yeah. And that is a little bit, I don't want to say it's a concern yet. I don't know if you saw the stats that I threw out earlier today in terms of home versus road. So, again, sample size isn't huge yet. Each group kind of has 4 or 5 games basically, but home versus high major teams, Purdue shooting 47.4% from 3. Home versus all teams, that's 9 games. They're shooting about 44% from 3. Neutral site, they're shooting 37, and road games so far, they're shooting 31.7 from 3. So, something to watch. I don't know that it's a big enough group of games to really, really say this is a trend. But something definitely keeping an eye on, especially because, you look those few home games where they were really heating up from 3, like Jakari was knocking some down, CJ was knocking some down. So your freshmen were knocking those down. I think it's always harder for those freshmen when they're on the road in that first season, especially as they just kind of get into it and get adjusted to it. So, but I'm with you for the threes that they are going to get. I think that's just, it's got to carry if Purdue's going to win this game. If it's another poor shooting game from 3, if it's a 17% like Rutgers or a 20 whatever percent like it was last night, I don't see really good opportunities to beat this Oregon team.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's, given that Oregon's kind of solid everywhere, Purdue just also generally is going to have to match that and just kind of be solid across the board. I think if they're the other, one of the keys for me is just kind of controlling the tempo. If they can play at Purdue's pace, and then where they get Oregon really into the half court, I think then they can force some turnovers like they've been doing, and that's where good things can happen. And then on top of that, though, it's just kind of play Purdue basketball and stay within what they do, and you're going to trust that's going to win you more games than not.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my keys actually too, just because of how much they've improved from that standpoint in terms of forcing turnovers. And I got all kinds of stats for you today, Joe, but in 5 of the last 6 games that Purdue played, they have forced teams to turn the ball over higher than their season average. In the 12 games before that, they had only done that 3 times. So it's been a significant change, and it's been like 3.5 to 4 turnovers higher than these teams' averages pretty much in that group. So I do think, just as Painter was talking about in the press conference when the question that I asked him, that kind of added pressure that they're able to apply with TKR and Caleb out there together. What, Caleb had 4 steals or 5 steals last night?
4 is my guess off the top of my head.
I think
but
so.
he had 4.
Yeah. So, and I'm kind of with you too. I don't want to get too high on this, but it just feels like Caleb's getting more and more comfortable offensively out there. And as I think about this matchup, who are you assuming Oregon's going to put on TKR? Biddle?
Yeah, Biddle.
All right. So if Biddle's on him, then Caleb's playing against Angel. I'm with you. I think there's opportunities there for some big-to-big passing and for some baseline cuts and that sort of thing. And I don't know, man. Maybe this West Coast trip is going to be like the rest of Caleb's breakout, where he's adding more to his offense output as well.
Maybe because it just clicked in my head. Wasn't the PK85 out on the West Coast
Mm-hmm.
his sophomore year? Maybe Caleb just
Yeah,
loves
it
the
was
West Coast.
it was in Oregon.
Yeah, maybe he just likes the West Coast. Maybe we just see another big Caleb game. He likes the Pacific Northwest, the rain, the vibes, all that good stuff. So maybe he just likes it up there.
Maybe. You got any other big things, big takeaways as we look at this game?
The only other thing, and I've referenced it at least twice now. Oregon is a team that is never fully out of it. They're also not a team that's really put a game away against a good team. They beat Stanford, who's right around 100 in KenPom by 15. They sort of controlled the full 40 minutes against San Diego State on a neutral floor. Besides that, they have not been able to put a team away. And so where I'm going with that is Purdue, I think, needs to have a strong start, but it is a game where you kind of have to play. Like, if Purdue wants a convincing win, they have to play for 40 minutes. Oregon is really never out of it, but at the same time, like, they've been down a lot in second halves at times. And so, but they come back. So just Purdue, even if they get that lead, just being able to keep pushing, not settling, and just play the full 40.
Yeah. Well, as we've kind of talked about a little bit last night, Purdue's on this stretch of games where they had opportunities to knock off a lot of wins. And like you said, the pressure kind of feels like it's off on this West Coast trip. They avoid a quad 2 loss at Washington. Now they get to go for, if they do happen to lose this game at Oregon, it's a quad 1 loss. So it's not going to be a big dent on the resume, but if they can manage to pull it off, it's a big feather in their cap, and it gets them back to 500 in quad 1 games. This is the first quad 1 opportunity Purdue has had since Auburn.
Yep.
Like, that seems forever ago. And it's wild because you look at the Big Ten in the net and you're like, man, there should be all kinds of quad 1 opportunities. But they've played a lot of teams that are in that like 40 to 60 range at home. So it doesn't count as a quad 1. And then their road games have been against teams that are some of the worst in the Big Ten on the net from that standpoint.
Yeah, Purdue's had the second easiest Big Ten schedule so far, just barely more difficult than MSU. In terms of, Big Ten championship title hopes, things like that, like, this isn't a must win, but I think in terms of, hey, how legit is Purdue? Are they just doing this against bad teams? Have they really turned a corner? This is a big game for that. If they can come out and control and win, like, that's a big step towards it. They're obviously, they have Ohio State next week, which I don't think is they're not super great, but a tourney-ish type team. And then you got the Michigan game. It's coming down at home next Friday. Because we're starting to get to the point, right? There's 7 games into the Big Ten. There's only 13 Big Ten games left. They are very much in the mix for a Big Ten title at this moment. You can almost say, like, hey, getting a win at Oregon sets you up to, like, hopefully, you should, I think, beat Ohio State. That Michigan game, if you win, you're looking very good. But if you lose, because you beat Oregon, you're still only 2 losses. You can kind of come back from that. So I don't know. It's simultaneously a very big game to me, but also not, if that makes sense.
No, I'm with you. And I mean, a lot of it, it's a big game depending on what happens else around the league, right? So we haven't got to see any of the top 4 play each other really to this point, right?
Sunday.
Illinois, Michigan. Yeah. So Illinois plays Michigan State on Sunday, and then we play Michigan next week. So you're finally going to get to see those top 4 teams start to battle a little bit. We're going to find out if Michigan is real or if they've been a little bit of a paper tiger because, even their Big Ten schedule has been the easiest, but their non-con wasn't super hard leading
Michigan
into
State,
that last stretch. Michigan State. Yeah, Michigan State.
Okay.
My bad.
No,
Michigan State. The end of their non-con wasn't the most difficult schedule either. So it's been a hot minute since we've seen Michigan State play somebody to know who they really are. We feel like we know more about Michigan and Illinois. But again, haven't played any of these other top 4 teams yet, so gonna find out a lot real soon.
Yep, it's we're getting very much into the thick of it. Purdue plays Michigan twice still. They have Michigan State later in the year, Illinois to close out the year, and then some important games in between still. So we will have coverage, previews, post-game shows for all of those. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications. You'll get notified as soon as we do go live. It is a 3:00 Eastern time tip. Saturday, January 18th on NBC and Peacock. So we will be live pretty much right after the final buzzer, where we will break down hopefully a Purdue victory. But regardless, we will be here no matter what. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will see you all then.